the next session, the plenary session. It's going to be devoted to technology. We were talking about earlier in the opening plenary about the importance of technology. And we at AMI, at the African Media Initiative, have a flagship program called the ANIC, which is the African News Innovational Channel. We have here the ICGF fellow, a Knight fellow, Justin Arenstein, who's also our chief digital strategist at AMI. And here we would like to also salute the presence of our funders, co-funders in the ANIC $1 million challenge, which is the Knight Foundation, Gates, Omidyar, Google, CAS Media, the State Department, OneIFRA. So I will now hand on to Justin to provide you with a little bit of a flavor of the showcasing of the 40 ANIC finalists. He's got a small little presentation which will take you on in terms of what ANIC is all about, what are the types of challenges we've been having, what are the innovative proposals for media news. So I'll hand it out to Justin, and we will then probably have some time for Q&A.
So hi, good afternoon, and thanks very much, especially after a very short tea break, actually. So my name, as Rukaya said, is Justin Arenstein, and I'm a former journalist who's currently working as a digital strategist for the International Center for Journalists, as well as for Google Africa. We're working with the AMI to help publishers and news media leapfrog the coming disruptions in their ecosystems. We're doing that through a number of strategies to try and build innovation in newsrooms and in media companies. So what I'm going to do quickly before we launch into the program is just lay the groundwork for you so that we understand what these forces are that are busy reshaping the media themselves, and more importantly, reshaping the media model, the business model underlying it. So if you look to the north and you look to the US and you look to Europe, you'll see that the business model, which is advertising or subscription-based, has undergone massive disruption. And what is being blamed for that disruption is the internet. But we need to understand why that is actually happening if we're going to plan new revenue models and new distribution models for our content. And just to give some background, the two early phases of the internet were an age of search, where people used the internet to get information from sources that they would ordinarily have used, such as the media, encyclopedias, or other legacy information systems. So it was a very thin internet. It's an internet we went to search established information and what we thought of as credible information. An age that came after that, how the internet evolved, it then evolved into an age of conversation, where suddenly technologies made it possible for every individual to become a media house on their own. They could publish a blog, they could reach out to friends and publish their personal lives through things like Facebook, through things like Twitter, and other social media. Both of these ages severely disrupted media as a watchdog and as a gatekeeper of content and information. They've changed the dynamic that people use to either produce information or to receive information. So once we understand that that's one of the qualitative changes that the internet's made, we then need to understand the current age that we're busy going through at the moment. And pundits up in the north are saying that we're currently in an age of context, where the internet, which started out as very, very skinny or very thin because it was just searching established official information, then got bolstered with far deeper information that people themselves created, citizen-produced or user-produced content. Things like Wikipedia, for example, suddenly started being used more than encyclopedias. That age of that means that suddenly the internet became a lot deeper, And when it became deeper and the technology, the actual search technology and the software technology became cleverer, it meant that the internet now starts understanding not just the information, but the relationships between people, companies, entities, and content. So suddenly the internet starts understanding the meaning of information. These are just some apps that I pulled off the iTunes store to just demonstrate some of the practical implications of that. So suddenly you have your cell phone, your mobile phone, starting to seamlessly and invisibly connect you to things around you. Everything from the people, the loved ones, or the close people in your life, where your cell phone will remind them or alert them that you're approaching home, that you want your dinner cooked, or that you need something. It also starts creating new physical relationships for you by finding people with similar interests. And then it takes it and starts using those same dynamics and that same understanding of context to start linking you with content and with products. So all four of these apps do that. They do it with shopping, they do it with music, they do it with people that you've never met before, and they also do it with loved ones in your lives. In fact, the first app there that's called Twist, if you program it correctly, it will even switch on your electric coffee maker at home as you start driving up your driveway. So it starts making your life easier. That's the current age that we're in. As media and as content producers, we need to understand these dynamics because this is the kind of information that our audiences are starting to demand. If we don't provide that information, they go elsewhere and they get the information from people who are not traditional media companies. So this is a new app or a new service that's being provided by Google. It's called Google Now. And what Google Now does is it mines all of that contextual information about who you are, what you spend your money on, and what your interests are. And then it starts filtering the news and the content that you might be interested in. So it doesn't bring you the national news headline. It brings you only the headlines in the national news that impact on your life, or more importantly, the lives of people who are close to you. Even if it brings you a sports story from the sports pages of a newspaper, from your social graph, it knows which player in the sports team you're most interested in, and it brings you the story with that angle. So it starts producing incredibly personal and very local news. And it's using content produced by legacy media, but stripping away the brand ownership. Why? Because the media have left a vacuum, and they haven't been quick enough to adapt or to take the lead in this changing landscape. But that's the present. So Google Now already exists, and there are very many other similar services that are doing this. And if you look in Africa, where we see plummeting data costs and plummeting costs of handsets for smartphones, as well as increasing speeds of access to data, especially in the rim countries, the countries along the coastlines of Africa, we're starting to see massive uptake of mobile phones. We're already seeing mobile companies as the largest advertising platforms in many of those countries. So this is the future. This is 3 to 5 years out. Google has already demonstrated the hardware prototypes for augmented reality media. So this means it's media where you wear a set of glasses and there's a small camera in the glasses and it projects the screen onto the glasses over the world that you see around you. So suddenly you're walking through a room like this and the people and the landscape speak to you. So I can look at someone, and if that person has tagged themselves on Facebook in a photograph and they haven't set their privacy settings so that it's private, the service will then say, you are looking at this individual, these are their personal likes and dislikes, this is how you know them through the following individuals. The same applies to looking at buildings, at content, and the rest of the landscape. You start seeing the embedded news, physically embedded in the landscape around us. Now that sounds like science fiction. So Google, if you look in the bottom of the slide, you'll see there's a picture of a person's face. He's wearing a very minimal set of glasses. That is already the working prototype of the glasses. They're already that light. They were demonstrated at a public event in San Francisco a couple of months ago, and they are due for commercial release in the next 18 months or so. They are going to be more revolutionary than tablets were. And the same disruptive influence that tablets, potentially for good, are having for legacy media, this is going to change the ball game completely, because it fragments the way even further that people deal with information. Services like this already exist. So anyone here who has a smartphone can download an app called Layar, L-A-Y-A-R, right now. And if you click on one that says 3D tweets, you can take your phone and, looking through the camera, look around the room, and you will see who is tweeting and what they are tweeting. It floats above their head. So you can actually see what they've just said online. People are already using this for media, specifically in Europe at the moment, in the Netherlands, which is where Layar is based. It makes a piece of dead wood, of paper, suddenly turn into a tablet and come alive. So what we've been doing with the News Innovation Challenge is try to tap into some of these disruptive technologies, which are not impossible. They sound science fiction, but they already are being deployed by media. And what we are trying to avoid in Africa is what happened up in the north, in the US and in Europe, where you saw iconic titles like the Christian Science Monitor and more recently Newsweek magazine having to abandon their print publications and go purely digital. Africa, for once, is in a lucky position that we have a lag, where we've had a bit of a window period of 3 to 4 years between this disruption that started in the US and then spread to Europe, and the disruption was of the business model underlying media. And it is only now starting to play itself out in some of the more mature digital markets in Africa, but it has not yet started impacting in the bulk of African markets. So this is a very good analytical piece by an economist about why that disruption happened in the northern media. And one of the key findings was that legacy media companies only spend 15% of their budgets on content creation. The rest of their budgets are spent on manufacturing, things like factories, distribution, and buying things like wood and paper and so forth. The companies that are our competitors are no longer media companies. They are things like mobile and digital companies. They're far more flexible and far more agile. So we need to understand our business models and our cost centers if we're going to compete with them and stave off some of the inroads that they're making into our markets. And AMI's attempt at an answer to some of those challenges facing the media is the African News Innovation Challenge. It's a $1 million venture fund, so it's not a traditional grant program. It's a venture fund, and what we try and do is find some of the best ideas or some of the best people with disruptive ideas across the continent. And then we make seed grants to them, so that they can develop working prototypes of those ideas. We're not under the illusion that all of these ideas or all of these grantees will end up being viable companies, but they're going to be piloting technologies that are going to help the rest of the media experiment with these new approaches, and potentially they're going to develop open source platforms that the rest of us can adopt at very low cost and very low risk. So as I said, it's $1 million. It's kicked off, or we called for applications in May this year. We had slightly over 500 applications. About 360 of them were on the open part of the website, and you can still browse them if you want to go and have a look at a marketplace of ideas. And then we did something unusual. We actually opened it up and we asked the public and the media to critically respond to those ideas. So we stimulated debate around the ideas and the proposals. We then went through a fairly aggressive technical evaluation process, and we narrowed down those 500 entries to 40 projects. Instead of wasting hundreds of thousands of dollars on a conference and a big banquet to bring them together and pat them on the back when we gave them an award, we rather brought them to a tech camp where we forced them to reevaluate their ideas. And in fact, we subjected them to a venture capital kind of environment where we told them their ideas were bad. And we forced them to try and defend their ideas and also compare their ideas with what other people in the room were doing. And as a result of that, we're seeing a lot of collaborations, and some of those 40 finalists have in fact changed their ideas. This is just a very quick overview of the categories that we invited applications in. They were fairly broad. We wanted new ways to gather the news. We wanted new ways to tell stories. We wanted new ways to engage with our audiences, because that's the crux of it. The way that the media are going to deal with people and communicate with them is changing dramatically. And then finally, because none of that content gathering, production, and dissemination makes sense if there's not a robust economic model underpinning it, we also ask for new ways for the media to generate revenue and not to cannibalize existing advertising models. So some of the trends that we saw from both the finalists as well as the broader 500 applicants were the following. There's a deep concern and interest in solving security issues around journalism. That's security of journalists in the field in difficult circumstances, security for whistleblowers and sources, security for data or information once we have that in our news organizations. So everything from encryption through to better physical protection for journalists. Secondly, there was part of a global spike of interest in data journalism. So this is how to take traditional content that we have. And in many of our companies, we're sitting on almost 100 years of editorial archives. And how to turn that editorial content into structured data that we can use to build things on apps, on mobile phones, on tablets, and on computers. But also importantly, for ways for us to mine those historic archives so that we can take historical editorial and return it into new kinds of apps and new kinds of content. We'll talk more about this on the next panel, which is about open data in the media. And then also we saw quite a large range of some fairly simple and some very innovative approaches to strengthening mobile engagement with audiences. Because most Africans, their first experience of the digital world is not through a computer, but through a mobile phone of some sort. And in fact, many people, we're seeing, there's a conversation yesterday where we're seeing in some of these rim countries that even people who are at the bottom of the pyramid are actually saving up and buying a smartphone because they then don't need to buy a computer. And they do everything from mobile money through to interacting with government services, school services, and then their social lives on these phones. When the price point drops to around about $50 for a reliable smartphone, we're going to see a massively changed dynamic for content producers. And then the other trends were, sorry, I just had to remind myself. The other trends were using some of these new digital media to visualize complex stories in simpler ways so that we can tell news far quicker and far more coherently. So a lot of our media suffer from long, rambling attempts to explain complicated concepts. This can often be done far better through infographics or through interactive data visualizations. And now that the tools that we need to build those things have dropped to virtually zero cost, we're seeing increasing experimentation about how to scale that in newsrooms. And then finally also, we've seen some fairly some fairly exciting attempts at stripping out the cost completely for workflow management systems in newsrooms. Previously, we were held hostage by the large conglomerates who provided us with workflow software in our newsrooms. We're now starting to see very robust and fairly nuanced workflow systems being produced on an open source basis with a freemium model. So we've seen a couple of those in our finalists as well. The experiment of bringing all of the the finalists together for a tech camp in an isolated setting, we chose an island in Zanzibar, was that we didn't just want to build a set of flashy apps or a set of good recipients that we could put in an annual report. We wanted to create a community of innovators. So we brought together 120 people, not just from our set of 40 projects who are in the finalists, but also from WAN IFRA's mobile news grantees, as well as a number of other both African and global pioneers. And we put them in a pressure cooker situation where there was not one single panel discussion, there was not one single plenary. What we rather did was we forced them to do speed dating, where they were forced to, in a structured environment, to speak to each other in very rapid fire and learn what each other's projects were, moving around a room. And as a result of that, by the end of the conference, everyone knew down to the last detail what everyone else's project was and where there were potential synergies between them. We saw a number of the finalists tweak and change their project proposals, which we encouraged. We saw a number of finalists completely abandon project proposals and submit new ones. And then, more importantly, we've seen a number of these participants now outside of ANIC reach out to each other for collaboration outside of the funded environment and start working together. And by doing that, we've now created a core of 120 news entrepreneurs and pioneers, digital pioneers, who we can now start bringing into our media companies either as disruptive thinkers or as devil's advocates to come and test the systems and the plans that we already have in place, or simply potentially as service providers who can help us solve some of the problems that we're facing. The judging panel, which is an international judging panel, largely composed of technology thinkers, is currently busy reviewing those 40 projects. And they'll come to a decision about a shortlist of, we're hoping, 20 to 25 projects by the 27th of November. And we'll announce the winning projects at the Africa Editors Forum in Kigali. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't look at the people who don't get grants. All 40 of those projects have either strategies or technologies that you could almost immediately deploy in your newsrooms. They're on the website. The website is, let's just have a look. I'll come back to that. The website is the one in the middle there, africanewschallenge.org. And there is a little tab on the site that says Meet the Finalists. You can have a look at the finalists. And there's also a tab that says Meet the Entrants. And you can actually go and shop through the other 450 odd projects that didn't make it to the finals to see if there's someone there who's thought of a solution to a problem you're facing in your media company. But just going back, the News Challenge is not a hit and run. It's not just a large glamorous program. What we're trying to do is build an ecosystem that is self-reinforcing. So the News Challenge is just one component of that. And to supplement the News Challenge, what AMI is doing is we are retaining a team of 3 to 4 technologists. These would be programmers, user interface designers, and data experts on a full-time basis for 1 year, primarily to help build some of the winning projects and provide technical support where the project themselves doesn't have depth, but more importantly, so that they can start finding technologies that work outside of Africa, bringing them to Africa and localizing them and customizing them so that we can deploy them here at either zero cost or at incredibly low cost so that we don't have to, as media companies, take that risk ourselves. There are a number of other initiatives that we'll speak about later in the program, but the idea here is that AMI is trying to take the risk out of experimentation for newsrooms by doing some of the more larger umbrella infrastructure projects so that media can build on top of that. And that's just a very quick overrun then of the Africa Media Initiatives Innovation Challenge. If anyone has any questions, I'm available afterwards, unless we have time now for some Q&A, Ruqaiya.
I think we have some time for some Q&A, because I think that probably we can. Thank you so much, Justin. I think we can entertain maybe 3 or 4 pressing questions, because I think this has really shown us that disruption is good for us. And so I will, take 3 or 4 questions maximum. Please make sure that they are short questions, they are focused, and please identify yourself. Yeah, do we have a microphone that, anyone? Yes, this gentleman there. Can we have a microphone coming to him, please? Un micro, s'il vous plaît. This light is blinding.
Merci de m'accorder la parole. Je suis Monsieur Kabala. Je viens de la République démocratique du Congo. J'ai suivi avec beaucoup d'intérêt cet exposé qui rejoint la préoccupation de mon pays, où la population a réellement besoin de l'information et particulièrement concernant la guerre. J'essaie quel est le rôle primordial que joue l'utilisation ou les utilisateurs de téléphonie cellulaire dans l'information du public. Je voudrais que l'intervenant nous donne quelle pourrait être la contribution de leur part pour que ce moyen soit démocratisé, étant donné que ce que nous faisons jusqu'à présent me semble être plutôt favorable à des métropoles plutôt qu'à des gens qui sont éloignés. Je voudrais vous apprendre que dans mon pays, il se développe actuellement une expérience qui mérite d'être partagée. Il y a notamment la Voix de l'Amérique qui a institué un système qu'on appelle les citoyens journalistes, à qui on a distribué de portables et qui donnent des informations de proximité et qui sont d'une très grande importance. Et par ailleurs, il y a une radio qui est financée par la Fondation Hirondelle, qui est une radio des Nations Unies, qui donne des informations et qui arrive à accéder à lieux où la chaîne de notoriété, donc les médias publics, n'arrivent pas à accéder. Mais il se pose un problème, certainement, pour ces journalistes, ces citoyens journalistes. C'est d'abord l'énergie électrique pour recharger leur portable et donner des informations en temps réel. Et quelle pourrait être la solution à ces problèmes? Merci.
Une autre question, si possible? Oui? Non? Okay.
Okay. So the challenges that you've mentioned are not just challenges in your country or a region. In fact, they're not just challenges that Africa faces. These are challenges that most of the developing South or the global South face, media markets. And we've seen a couple of suggested solutions for improved ways of getting both text-based and USSD-based information to rural and both rural as well as urban audiences. But content delivery is the smallest and the easiest part of the challenge that we need to solve. What we need to solve is ways for the media to actually make money off those mobile audiences. Because otherwise all that we're doing is creating audiences for mobile companies themselves to take over from us. Journalists and content, unfortunately, are incredibly cheap. Then it's not difficult to produce. And mobile companies are starting to realize this. So we're starting to see the first experiments in Africa of mobile companies setting up their own newsrooms and content production units. We've got a very small window period to move quickly and build on our historical advantages before they take the market away from us. And the model that we're looking at is creating layered tools so that you can reach out to text-based audiences and create value-added services for those audiences. And that doesn't mean just regurgitating the news that you have on your radio station or your television station. It means creating completely new content and new services for mobile audiences. So you should look at mobile as a way of augmenting your reporting, not duplicating your reporting. And then above that layer, we're looking at people who are producing mobile websites or Mobi sites for feature phones. So these aren't yet smartphones, but they're able to have internet connectivity. And there are very successful models for doing this in the strangest of places. So in West Africa, people who've had some of the most or the biggest successes are the beer companies, alcohol companies. And if you look at places like Nigeria and you look at Guinness and you look at the communities that it's managed to build around mobile web-based audiences and fantasy football, for example, you see a model that we could repurpose around other kinds of content and community building. And by building a community, you're building an audience. And then at the very top of this ecosystem, we're looking at smartphones where you can build apps and you can build dynamic, updated, and interactive content. And that's a growing market and a fairly rich market. So even though it's still small, it's lucrative. You need to take a platform agnostic approach, is what we're telling a lot of the people that we're working with. So you try and not design for one platform. Design a strategy and then deliver your content over multiple platforms. But don't just regurgitate it, calibrate it for each one of those platforms. I hope that answers at least some of your question.
Thank you so much, Justin, for this fascinating face of the future of the African continent. I think you talked about, building a community, which is fundamentally important. Innovation, technology is there. But I would like to take the opportunity to also say that ANIC has produced model for other types of similar projects, and we are at AMI and with other partners actually contemplating and looking at developmental reporting, storytelling, because for a long time we've understood that Africa needs to tell its story. So there is a project that's going to happen very soon. We are yet to finalize on the details of that, but basically it would be about story reporting and providing the necessary content, that's necessary liquid for the platforms to happen and to make it a much more sort of engaging and insightful system. So thank you so much, Justin, for providing us this fascinating overview and insight of some of those 40, and I think we can definitely visit the website for more information. Thank you so much. But that actually allows us to seamlessly move on to the next panel, which is the challenge of open data, media and open data revolution. So I would like to ask and welcome the panelists and the chair. The chair is Mr. Eric Chinji, and we've got a number of the panelists who will actually speak to that. And we've also got a keynote speaker, Mr. Shiv Kumar from Nokia, the Senior Vice President of Nokia Middle East and Africa. So please, I would welcome you to the stage so that we can move to the next plenary. Thank you. Do we have Mrs. Amaka Igwe, please? Is she in the room? No?
Hello. Looks like the transition wasn't as smooth as it should have been, but we needed time to put on the microphone, so I hope we're craving your indulgence for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to this session on media and the open data revolution. Let me take a moment to put this in context for all of us. The choice of this topic and the fact that we're discussing open data today is not as a result of mere happenstance. It fits into an overall process that we hope will deliver quality journalism to this continent. It's a process that began many years ago, back in 2004, with the recognition of the fact that media had an important place in the overall context of development in Africa. In 2005, the initiative to create a regional structure that would begin to meaningfully address the problems of media in Africa, looking at the full range of issues, was started in 2005 with efforts to establish what became the African Media Initiative, AMI, which is now based in Nairobi and responsible for a lot of what we've been seeing. Then in 2008, it became evident to those who were involved in that effort that it was important to involve the owners of independent media in Africa. The reason for that was because a lot of the new professionals entering the profession, coming into media, were mostly from independent media. Most of the existing media at the time, which was for the most part government, had the only trained professionals in the country. So we moved on. We had to involve these people who, at the turn of the decade, in 1990, 91, 92, brought in a flood of young people into the profession, for the most part untrained, for the most part not knowledgeable about the basic ethics and systems in media. Now, that led to the creation of the AMLF, and it's been a growing proposition ever since. We went from 50 people in 2008, 50 plus media owners, to over 400 today. Now, later on in the process, as we began to identify the problems and seek to address them, the financial constraints, the ethical constraints, the capacity constraints, the policy constraints, as AMI identified these problems and began to address them, the one overarching problem at the level of training that became evident was the need for, and that would also in some ways speak to the ethical issues, was the need for more credibility in reporting. Newspaper articles across this continent, especially, again, newspaper articles across the continent in both public and private media, were beginning to draw down we're beginning to have we're entering that area of reputational crisis because they were beginning to lack credibility. And we thought one way to address that would be fact-based journalism. That took us in 2010 into greater thinking about how do we address the issue of fact-based journalism? How do we bring more credibility to the work of the media professional? And of course, when you go into that domain, you enter the area of data, verifiable information. And very quickly, AMI went into league with a number of institutions, the World Bank Institute, which is represented here, the ICFJ, the International Center for Journalists based in Washington, went into partnership with them, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so on, to begin to look at how we address the problem of media using data to give more credibility, more facts, more truth to the newspaper stories. So today, we're going to be talking about what, in effect, has become the data revolution. Some fascinating things have been happening ever since under the leadership of some of the gentlemen you see here, Justin, Craig, and others. And so we're going to have them talk about their experiences, and hopefully, by the end of this session, the media owners in this room will see the need to engage, to be more involved, to make sure the young men and women that we are bringing into the profession are equipped to enter that open data space that is also helping to improve the quality of governance and leadership on the African continent. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I will call, let me first of all try to very quickly introduce those we have on the panel. There was supposed to be a lady, you know. I don't like this total gender imbalance. Actually, it's not even gender imbalance, it's gender blindness. But having said that, we have the keynote speaker who comes to us from who's the senior vice president, who comes to us from India, and is based actually in Dubai. That's where you're based, right? Yes. Based in Dubai. Mr. Shiv Shivakumar, Vice President, Senior Vice President, I would say, of the India, Middle East, and Africa. He will, I'll have you give further details about yourself, sir, and maybe just speak to the issues. And then I'll introduce the others as we go along.
So, I start?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Fourth Estate. What Edmund Burke called the Fourth Estate many years ago, the first three being the church, nobility, and the House of Commons. Media is extremely important if Africa needs to realize its potential. Africa, currently growing at 5% per annum, is one of the biggest growth markets in the world. And if it needs to grow at 5% per annum, it needs a very strong dose of free and challenging media. I refer back to Amartya Sen, who in his Nobel Prize-winning book said a very simple thing. He said, in the last 200 years, there's been no famine in a country which is democratic with a free media. And a lot of that statement applies to a number of the 54 countries in Africa. So what I'll cover for you today is media, mobile phones, data points, the top applications, and the impact of the mobile phones. Okay? Slides not going? Yeah, no, I'm checking there also. Okay. So let's look at the media journey. This journey over 200, 300 years started actually with the theater. The theater was somebody's ability to communicate something and a bunch of people to hear it and then take it forward to the next level of population. The second was the printing press. The printing press necessitated that people could read and write. That's what it necessitated. And that was the next big innovation which helped media. The third was the postcard. And the simplicity of the postcard was its ability to have a standard price. So standard price has been a very important determinant of the spread of media. And I assure you that standard price and data plans for mobile phones will have the same effect. Okay? Having different price plans don't really work. Next, telegraph. The ability to send and receive messages was critical. And telegraph was priced by the number of words. Think about the parallel in terms of the number of words on Twitter or SMS or whatever it is. There is a strong correlation back there again. Radio was the ability to hear, and press for 100 years ruled before radio came on. Next, telephone, ability to hear and speak. Television, ability to see and hear. And the World Wide Web, a combination of all the senses. The point here about media is, every time you've had something new coming up, the older medium always knocked them and said, this is of no use. People knocked books, people knocked radio, people knocked television, people knocked the web. Every single time. So the media does not seem to learn that innovation is something which consumers want and will always move forward whether they like it or not. And the key thing is to adapt to it. Sorry, I had another chart. Yeah. Media as an expression is something from the 1920s, but more important, media as a city existed somewhere near the Caspian Sea in Asia, somewhere where the Kurds live today. Media has always been a confluence of three factors: politics, advertising and the business model you think about, and technology. Okay, politicians have always had a love-hate relationship with media. Because they need the media to be popular, they don't want the media to report on things which are unpopular. And the genesis of this is the early correspondents for media were all war correspondents. And many a time you didn't want war reporting which was against your own country. So in a sense there was a bit of a moral censorship and a bit of statesmanship for the country. Okay, advertising and business models have been the biggest challenge and will continue to be the biggest challenge in the World Wide Web situation. In the digital world, getting your money's worth is going to be a challenge. And the confluence of these three is what helps copyright and things like that. A debate we always have in terms of who owns the copyright. This is the media journey I spoke about. Okay, if you look at the sheer population, the future is going to be mobile. There is no doubt about it. If anybody doubts it, then he has to look at these numbers. The world has a population of 7 billion people. The world has 6 billion SIM cards, 5 billion mobile phones, of which 1 billion is smartphones, 4 billion is feature phones. Smartphones today is 1 billion. In the next 3 years, it's expected to be 2 billion. Okay, so it's going to be a very data-rich phone right now there. So smartphones are going to double in the next 3 years. Feature phones are getting smarter and smarter. This definition of what a smartphone is not what a manufacturer decides. It's not Nokia who decides what a smartphone is. It's the consumer who decides what a smartphone is, depending on the features and the applications and what the consumer can do with his or her phone. If his phone can give health tips, it's a very smart phone. If his phone can do something with finance, it's a very smart phone. If his phone can give him information, it's a very smart phone. This definition by manufacturers is completely wrong, and in a future world in Africa will not apply. So that's the ratio you see of any technology. Television, 2 billion sets. PCs, 1.5 billion. Cars, 1 billion. So there's absolutely no doubt that the future of Africa and the future of most of what we're talking about in a future world will be determined by the mobile phone. Okay, so if you look at 84% of the phones today sold by 2013 will have data capability. Almost universal. So even a phone at a $50 range will have data capability. So you don't need to worry about that. Next, in Middle East Africa, if you notice, feature phones and smartphones are going to be the bulk of the market in the next 2-3 years. In Africa specifically, we will cross 1 billion phones very quickly. Very, very quickly. So in a sense, Africa, after China and India, is the next big billion growth opportunity. And luckily for Africa, it's happening at a time when the price of the products has come down, the price of the hardware, and the price of the features, services, and what's available to it has absolutely multiplied many times over. If you look at these are the Africa data points, almost every single country has high penetration, and every time there's a 10% jump in mobile penetration, you get more than a 1 or a 1.2% kick in GDP. Okay, there's a direct correlation in terms of penetration of mobile phones and the GDP growth of a country. Mobile is where the action is going to be. There's no doubt about that. This is data from the USA, where 22% of the US population owns a tablet, 44% own a smartphone, and 50% either a tablet or a smartphone. A tablet in this part of the world will be very big on two accounts, education and entertainment. The combination of any country which has a need for high education, high entertainment, will see the growth of 7-inch tablets and beyond in the price back at about $150 to $200. That's the sweet spot, and that's what you should be looking at. The global market for data is going to quadruple 4 times in the next few years. Okay, it's going to quadruple. How is this going to happen? Because speeds are going to be much faster. The advent of 3G networks and 4G networks for phones will actually multiply the desire for these kind of data and its applications on a mobile phone. What are the top mobile applications in the future? Social is big. People have always had a hunger to reconnect for time immemorial. The mobile phone, with its personal screen, helps them do that better than anything else. Social networking will be very, very big, number one. Number two, entertainment will be very big. Nigeria, many kilometers from here, produces 2,000 movies a year. India produces 1,000 movies a year. Hollywood produces 800 movies a year. The advent of video entertainment will be big in Africa with mobile phone. Security and productivity. Maps and location is a classic challenge in most of Africa, because you really don't need to have a map. All you need to do is roll down your window and ask somebody, where is the next town or where is the next place? It's the simplest thing to do. But maps has a very different use, and I believe it will be security-led in most parts of Africa. Exactly like Latin America, where maps will be security-led. So this will be a very big security innovation in this continent. Mobile money will be another big one here. This requires enormous trust and credibility. And this requires trust and credibility in the institution that offers it. Without that, health and finance don't work on the mobile phone. The influence of mobile on media consumption is huge. 50 million. If you look at the number of years taken for 50 million subscribers, anything on the mobile phone is the shortest. Okay, every single thing is in multiples of hundreds of months. TV is no longer breaking news. It's mobile phone which is breaking news. Crowdsourcing of news is important. Tsunami is a great example in Japan. Okay, the Mumbai attacks started the Twitter revolution in India. Okay, the Haiti earthquake also started it. So something to do with a natural calamity, something to do with an election, something to do with sporting events really drive the consumption of data very, very fast in most of the emerging markets. Okay? News will be outsourced. The whole of news game has been about generating content and distributing content. In the future, generating content will not be in your hands. By and large, it will be in the hands of your consumers. So crowdsourcing will be very important. Okay? In summary, at the end of my 10-15 minutes, what I would say is media is defined by 2 things in the future world. 1, digital. 2, screen. You cannot get away from it. Whether it's a 2-inch screen or a 70-inch television screen, that's what will define it. Okay? 2 things. Second, media is moving from analog and different to digital and converged. That's what we see repeatedly. Third, gesture started communication. I believe gesture technology will take the whole game significantly forward. We've come to touch right now. Gesture is a few, maybe months or a few years away. Today's youth thinks in sound bites. They think in headline terms, not body copy. It has a huge impact on the way you report news and the way you collect information. Okay, this generation is a sound bite generation. It's not a body copy generation. Next, news is impulsive. Monetizing this impulsive nature of news is going to be a big challenge. And for years, we've seen different monetization models. Shakespeare, for instance, did not monetize his book. He made his money through selling tickets to his shows. That's how he monetized it even in the 1600s. So many avenues of monetization are what are important in tomorrow's world. And finally, every media brand will have its own website. There is absolutely no option. So you live in a physical world, you live in a digital world, because that's how the consumer of the future is going to be. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time.
Thank you, Shiv, and we want to also thank you for offering the tonight. No, it's tomorrow night, isn't it? It's tonight, yeah. Tonight at the gala, Shiv and Nokia have offered some smartphones that'll be open for competition to whoever wins them. So we want to thank you for that. And thank you for a brilliant presentation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to invite the other panelists to each give us 5 to 7 minutes of presentation, and we want to leave enough time for interaction, and I hope there'll be lots of questions from the field, from the floor. My first panelist I want to call on is, all of them are good friends. I was going to say a good friend of mine, but all are great friends of mine. Craig Hammer is the first one I'm going to call on. Craig and I worked for a long time together at the World Bank, and he's still there. And he and I were responsible for some fascinating ideas that he's working alone to implement now. Craig is going to talk to us about open data. You know, for the first time last year, the World Bank actually put out all of its data, has been encouraging countries to do the same, and it's, the whole field of open government is taking on a really major dimension right now. I'm going to call Craig to then set the context and talk to us a little bit about open government and open data. Craig.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Eric. For those of you who may not know, the World Bank's Media Development Program was created because of Eric Chinjay. He was my boss, and so I'm going to try to behave myself today. It was very much thanks to Eric that this program was initiated in the first place. The relationship between media and open data was one that had not percolated to the surface of public consciousness at the World Bank until recently, and it's so thank you to Eric. Eric is my friend and my mentor, and it's a great pleasure to be sharing the stage with you today. Thanks. So, as Eric mentioned, my name is Craig Hammer. I work at the World Bank Institute, and I lead the World Bank Institute's Media Development Program. And we're going to talk about data. Now, data is a potentially intimidating term. What am I talking about when I say data? I think the problem is when we think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's an abstract word. We're talking about what data can do for you. We're talking about census information. We're talking about population numbers, income levels, literacy rates. We're talking about measuring performance of elected officials, what they promised, what they actually delivered, their voting record. We're talking about registration of corporations at the national and subnational level. We're talking about information that can help people make better decisions in their day-to-day lives. So when we say data, we're not just talking about abstract numbers floating out in the ether, we're talking about useful information. We're talking about information that comes from suppliers, authoritative suppliers, that can be released to the public and where the public can engage, ideally through authoritative infomediaries like the media, to be able to make those better decisions. So we have to start by asking ourselves a question. We need a reality check. What does a 21st century journalist look like? What does a 21st century media organization look like? Can we rely on legacy tools and approaches, or do we need to think a little bit forward? And I'm not talking about digital first. I'm not talking about things that are going to fundamentally uproot traditional legacy media. We're talking about augmenting existing practices, providing a potential stronger data orientation on our business models to be able to take stock and benefit from something which is coming down the pipeline. You heard Justin talk earlier in the day about what's happening, the open data revolution, the extent to which information has become the new currency. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we leverage that and benefit from it? How can media organizations capture their own data? How can they make use of data that's increasingly coming from government? How can they find ways to generate revenue using this data? And then what opportunities can we interrogate the data, release it to the public, our news consumers, so that they themselves have better access to information and can make better decisions at a granular level in their day-to-day lives? So the point of why I'm here right now is to talk about the supply side and the demand side of open data, okay? So from the World Bank's perspective, The bank obviously does exactly what you would expect it to do. There are financing components for projects and things on open data related issues. As Eric had mentioned, slightly more than a year and a half ago, the World Bank opened its own data for free. It's available right now on data.worldbank.org. It is a wealth of information that can be used. It's available to everyone for free, and I strongly encourage you to have a look and see what's there. There's also knowledge, research, data. These are information that the bank can provide in terms of its knowledge support and technical assistance for individual organizations, but also for the entire sector. And of course, there's capacity development, which we'll dive into a little bit later. Part of the process has been to align ourselves with global drivers of change. And that is at 3 levels, obviously. The public. The bank has developed a social contract with the public. So we're talking about civil society alignment. We're talking about sources of technical knowledge and development, including and in particular in the media sector. And in this case, personified very much by the African Media Initiative, with whom we have very tight alignments. And of course, looking at how we can leverage these relationships to respond to global challenges. Daunting, global, real, practical challenges. How do we find solutions that are meaningful and exponentially relevant, that can be scaled and repurposed to meet needs in more than one region? So when we talk about the open data ecosystem, this is a phrase you heard earlier in the day. We're talking about supply and demand. Supply of data, who has it? Where is it? Where can I find it? What are tools we can use to be able to capture it and blow it out so that the public can use it? And then who's demanding it? In other words, what role does the public have? What role does the media have in demanding useful, high-value data? And then importantly, where is their support? What can organizations and multilaterals do, like the World Bank, to support this process from the outside? So let's talk about the supply. So without going into too much detail, there are standards for the kinds of information which are useful, the kinds of data that we're looking for. Needless to say, the goal is machine-readable data, all right? And we're not talking just, again, about numbers. It's not just about numbers. It's words, it's facts, it's figures. It's GIS coordinates for maps. It's names of counties. It's, again, data literacy rates. It's names of parliamentarians, voting records. This is all information that can be structured. And if it's structured, you can interrogate it. You can work with it. And you can feed that into narratives that you're developing, and you can parse it to make sure that your business model is reflective of information that you receive because it's structured. There's also unstructured data. This is value too. There are tools and things I think that Justin may go into in a few minutes that you can use today, media organizations, to actually be able to provide structure for what's called unstructured data. If you're sitting on years and years of old newspapers, there's technology now that you can scan these newspapers using the semantic web and actually retrieve and scrape data from old, as Justin calls it, dead wood. Unstructured data is a source of potential, unbelievable amounts of revenue, and it's important that we explore that. And of course, the data that is available from the public, from the crowd. Crowdsourced information is also valuable from a development perspective in terms of social and economic development, but also from a private sector's perspective. So again, what are we talking about? Data that's technically open, okay? You can search it, you can find it freely online. Obviously, again, preference for machine-readable formats. And again, without going to too deep details, the difference between machine-readable and non-machine readable is exactly what you think it is. PDFs, not helpful. There is technology where you can scrape a PDF, but more often we're talking about spreadsheets. If you can release information in a spreadsheet, it makes it that much more accessible and that much more useful. It's data that's legally opened and licensed that way. So you can use it freely, you can reuse it freely, you can distribute it for commercial and non-commercial purposes. Now that's important. When we say legally open, it means freely available. There are licensing regimes that are in place that can help media organizations leverage their own data, open it up, but license it for products and tools that are created using that data. There's some very interesting models, for example, from The Guardian UK, where they effectively make huge amounts of data open for the public to sift through and analyze. And if they decide they want to do something interesting or build an app that uses that data, They have to engage into a licensing regime with The Guardian UK so that they split the proceeds of sales from the apps. That's exciting. We're talking about very little way of effort on the front end, except just scraping and releasing data and letting the public do what it needs to do. And if the public finds a potentially viable opportunity to make some money, the revenue is split with the media house itself. So we talked about where you can find data, okay? Increasingly, and this is something we can talk about a bit more in a moment, governments are releasing data in machine-readable formats under a process called the Open Government Partnership. We don't have to go into too much detail there, but the bottom line is there is an increasing, growing movement of openness and transparency by government in cooperation with multilaterals like the bank, where information flows are coming increasingly from the top. But it needs to be regulated, obviously. There needs to be a strong demand-side component to it to make sure that the data that's being released is high-value data. We're getting some very interesting data sets being released by government, and in some cases, the utility of these things comes into question. I think a data set was released in Kenya that had the total number of mules in Nairobi, which is great if you're interested in providing services that have a mule component to them. But ultimately, if we are finding ways to surface public opinion about what kinds of data matter to people and feeding that back to government, closing that feedback loop, then suddenly you have information flows that are much more democratized and much more responsive to public demand. Again, why? The refrain is the best part of the song, so we'll keep coming back to this issue. It's more data is more knowledge. Public and private knowledge, that's commercial and non-commercial knowledge, and it equals better decisions. It helps people make better decisions in their day-to-day lives. We'll zoom past this. Okay, demand. We talked a bit about this before. All right, data has to be demand-driven. We talked about technology not completely eclipsing traditional processes. We're talking about amplifying human intent and capacity. It's not a substitute. It's not a panacea. It's just helping us do what we do, but better. We can mobilize citizens to use data. It helps reduce costs of participation by opening information on the supply side. Feedback on service delivery also diminishes, for example, transaction costs for public services. If people have access to information about where their water points are in their community, it's less transaction cost to have to ask for that kind of information through a Freedom of Information Act request, and releases government to do other important service delivery processes. Entry points for demand. We talked about, and I think Justin is going to talk about a bit more of this, which are how can we, that is to say our collaborators and the World Bank, provide support for the demand side, and ranging on things from training to knowledge platforms and more. Because, again, more data, better decision making. Support. This is a quick one, which is what are we doing to try to provide some support? We talked about capacity development before, knowledge and learning. This is what we're talking about. Justin's going to dive into it a bit more. Basically, what kinds of tools, processes, mechanisms, resources are available from organizations like the World Bank, from the African Media Initiative, that can help kickstart or accelerate this process? How can we provide an opportunity for media organizations to strengthen their data orientation, not just in their reporting and journalistic processes, which is important, but also at the business level, at the institutional level? How do we adopt a stronger data orientation so that we are segmenting and responding more surgically to our news consumers' needs? And it's through processes that I think Justin will also go into. And it reflects, again, the tight collaboration between the African Media Initiative and the World Bank Institute. Some of the engagement opportunities that Justin will talk about are things we call them data literacy boot camps. This is essentially what the last 2 months of our lives look like. This is South Africa. This is Tanzania, Ghana, and another one is in Tunisia, where effectively it is a boot camp that we bring together journalists and civic coders and designers together, break down barriers between these groups, and teach them how to scrape data from the net, how to clean it, how to craft narratives around the data, and how to visualize it, basically. How to strengthen their data-driven reporting skills. Just some images, for example. South Africa. I think we've got a couple from Tanzania here. This is in Sudan, Kenya, and Ghana. So just moving a bit closely, I mean, what the goal of this process is to show that you're bringing the supply and the demand side together. That is the value addition from this partnership that the World Bank Institute has with the African Media Initiative. We are able to say, we can bring open data focal points in government from the line ministries together with demand side actors, that is to say media organizations, media owners, so that you can build relationships and move forward in lockstep rather than working in different trajectories. And part of the process, again, is media owner engagement, making sure that the decision makers in the media organizations themselves have a seat at the table and are able to express themselves and to dialogue with government so that everyone, again, is moving forward together. It's sharing knowledge from technical knowledge on open data as well. This is something we can talk about again in a moment, which is effectively making sure that we realize and understand and can capitalize on the deep technical knowledge which is emerging on this continent and sharing that across regions. We have, for example, knowledge sharing exercises between Kenyan technologists bringing it to Central Europe, where Kenyans are teaching Moldovans about open data processes on the supply side and the demand side. We'll just so basically, again, other potential supports, looking at how we can leverage this. Again, the refrain, more data, more knowledge, better decision-making processes. And again, I think it's becoming clear now where we were. It's important that we understand where we're going, and we think about this as concretely and practically as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Craig. And when I said goodbye to the World Bank a few months ago, I said if I had to do it all over again, after 20 years, the one person I'd love to work with would be Craig Hammer. He's a fantastic guy. Give him a hand, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I want us to take this down to a more practical level so that there's a clear message to all the media owners. The 21st century, journalism of the 21st century, believe it or not, will be data-driven journalism. If you're in this room and afraid of the machine and afraid of the numbers, no hassle. Just let the young people take over. Be courageous enough, but let them do it. That's how your news organization is going to survive. Now, how do we do that? I'm glad Craig ended up with that last question. What will be journalism in the 21st century? One man can tell us what that journalism is going to be and what he and the rest of the leaders, the other leaders, the younger leaders like him, in the field, are going to help us do about it. Justin Aronstein, my bearded friend, I kept mine a little low, but thank you.
Well, that comment about younger people scares me. I'm also starting to go grey, so I'm starting to feel like a dinosaur as well. So what Craig and myself and a number of other partners, including Google, the Open Knowledge Foundation, and a coalition of other technology thought leaders have been doing across Africa for the past 8 months or so, and also now into Eastern Europe, is trying to take some of these very high-level ideas about data and about how do we get beyond just numbers and start turning numbers into stories. We've been taking that down into real newsrooms and into countries where technology is a major, major challenge. And we've been doing that to try and prepare for this future, a future where people are going to consume information in small little bite sizes as they move through the world. And they're going to consume that information mostly because it relates directly to their lives or to an activity that they're busy undergoing or they're busy performing at that exact time. So how does a media company take a newspaper or a television program or a radio show and break it down so that it can be embedded into the environment around them in this way? It's not difficult. Media and journalism, at least in Anglophone newsrooms and very many other newsrooms, already work with data points. We train our journalists to work with the 5 W's and the H. Why, where, what, when, and so forth, and how. And already those are individual data points. What we have to do to try and get into a more digital future is expand on the number of data points that we use in our news reporting. And we need to do it right from news collection phase. When the journalist is out in the field, they need to start taking a GPS reading of where that news event or interview took place so that you can embed it into a landscape like this. Because if a newsroom has to go back and do this afterwards, after the news has already been produced, it builds in cost inefficiencies. So what we've been trying to do is harvest and leverage off some of these very early experiments in Morocco, in Kenya, in Ghana, and South Africa and elsewhere, where governments are starting to release all of the data that they have under their umbrella. This is everything from those dreaded numbers, things like budgets and delivery plans, but it also includes a lot of information about where things are, the physical location of schools, of infrastructure, of bridges, of services. And that's always been important to media, because the closer something is to you as an audience member, the more important it is in your life. So proximity suddenly starts becoming something that we can do scientifically. And that's where suddenly we can start competing against the biggest weakness that we have when we face up to mobile media. Mobile media know through their devices where our audiences are. If it's a smartphone like this with a gyroscope, the mobile company even knows what our audience is facing towards or looking at. It knows their spending patterns, it knows their social patterns, it knows their device usage patterns. We don't have those analytics, which is why we've been losing out on advertising. We, the shotgun, the very blunt spade when it comes to advertising. Mobile companies are able to have a very narrow laser precision in terms of delivering their advertising. And one of the ways of competing against that is by trying to get data both about our audiences, but also about the content that we're pushing at our audiences so that we can push them very precision content. So this is an example of the Kenyan open data website built with partially with World Bank money and support in Kenya by the Kenyan government. It has roughly, and I might be slightly off, it has roughly 700 data sets in it that are free for download by the media as well as by entrepreneurs who can build services on top of that. Websites as well as advisory services as well as mobile services. It took a couple of months to put together. And over the past 4 months, the media in Kenya have said, now what can we as the media do with that information? So the AMI has adopted Kenya as a laboratory, a nation-sized laboratory. And again, in partnership with the local office of the World Bank in Kenya, which is different from the World Bank Institute, we launched something called Code for Kenya. And what Code for Kenya does is two things. It embeds data experts or data wranglers into newsrooms. So we know that journalists and media companies don't have these data technology or data engineering skills in their companies and would be terrified of hiring them in, because once you've hired a staff member, you're saddled with that person. You can't get rid of them in a hurry if they prove to be the wrong find or if the technology is not the right fit. So we've sponsored 4 data fellows in Kenya, and through a competitive bidding process, we've embedded them into 3 large media companies and into 1 non-profit organization that services grassroots media. And over the past 4 months, these data fellows have been building bulk infrastructure for their host companies, as well as developing the very first data-driven apps for audiences. And the idea, again, is to lower the entry level or the barrier for experimentation by taking out the cost risk for the host companies. Their website is at the bottom of the slide. If you want to have a look at the model, it's very easy to implement in your own country. And you don't have to wait for government to roll out an open data program, because every piece of dead wood with writing on it is actually full of data. And these tools that Craig was talking about, we're teaching journalists how to take this and turn it into digital information. And then once it's in digital information, how to turn it into structured data so that they can start building things on top of that. So there are 2 data fellows from Code for Kenya in the audience. I want to embarrass them and ask them if they're in the room just to raise their hands, so that if you want to find out, maybe stand up, David, so that if you want to find out exactly what their experiences are in legacy or dinosaur newsrooms, and how they're helping to evolve those newsrooms into a more digital future, these are the guys that you should grab. So David is a young programmer from Kenya. He's in fact leading the developer team, so he's an engineer. And then we have one of the strategists, also possibly out of the room at the moment, but I'll introduce him to you when I see him next. And what these guys have done, so the government's data program, open data program in Kenya, has cost tens of millions of dollars. What the media initiative has done for $500 is usurp the Kenya Open Data Portal, which used to be the biggest open data portal in Africa. For $500, they've now built something called africaopendata.org, which is now twice the size of the Kenyan portal. And what we're doing is this has been driven by journalists who are liberating data from newsrooms as well as public sources and posting it in a central repository where they can start analyzing stories and creating and delivering more evidence-based and deeper or more insightful reporting to their audiences, as well as augmenting their news reporting by starting to build apps. One example from Kenya is a story that came out of a boot camp where a reporter analyzed why schoolgirls were dropping out of school, and there was no real explanation in just certain districts at a certain age. And by analyzing lots of data and then backing it out by going and doing real reporting on the ground, she was able to find out that the failure of government agencies to deliver sanitation and hygienic facilities in those schools meant that young girls who started undergoing menstruation were stopping going to school completely through embarrassment, or alternatively at specific times of the month. And as a result, the academic results were severely impacted. So she used data to uncover a trend that no one else had been able to dig out before. She then used data to tell that story in a compelling, evidence-driven way, using visualizations on a television documentary. And then she used data platforms to build ways for audiences in terms of parents and school people themselves and civil society to start mobilizing around this issue so that they could pressure the education authorities and governments to do something about the problem. That was done with 4 days of training in using data. When the person started the data training at, I just want to go forward, at a boot camp, she didn't know how to work a spreadsheet. By the end of 4 days, she was able to start mining data and then start trying to ask it questions so that it could tell her new stories, as well as build some very basic maps and visualizations. So that's just a very small illustration of the potential power for data. Data can be a tool that improves our reporting, as well as a tool for helping us engage more dynamically with our audiences. But it can also be far more powerful. So this is a very new data portal, and we think it's the first in Africa, by a media company, again, a Kenyan media company, the Nation Group. And what they've done is, using their data fellow, they've started turning some of their editorial content into structured data. And they've then created a portal where the public can now access this data. They've already published it. So they've extracted their initial value from that content. They've either published it on a website, on a TV show, or on a newspaper. Now they're saying, here's the information. What else can you, as a technology developer or a specialist blogger or some other kind of developer, do with our information? There's licensing, so they're not giving it away free of charge. But they're making available suddenly rich content that now external developers don't have to go and create themselves. And they're creating potentially new revenue streams. It's still very small. I think if you can see the screen properly, there are only 12 data sets on the data portal. But this is an early experiment of potentially the way that media companies are going to start creating new leverage and new value in those archives that invariably just take up space in a media building. Very importantly, it's not just putting your data out there, it's also building something called APIs. It's effectively building an electricity socket, almost a plug, into your company so that anyone building an app or a website can come and without any fuss or any risk of contaminating or corrupting your information, they simply plug their service into your media company and they suck the content out. And you can monitor it, you can charge it, or you can create more innovative revenue models around it so that it's a freemium or a partnership model. And we've seen some of those up in the north. And then also, now that you've got these tools, and we've been training people, as Craig was saying, we've done, I think, 5 data boot camps or 6 data boot camps in the last year, including our first one in Eastern Europe, in Moldova, where we had Africans flying into Eastern Europe to teach people how to use data. And we had Europeans from Western Europe coming through to learn at that experience as well. But to build a larger community of people who now start using this new resource that we've created, we're also hosting things called hackathons, which is where you get together developers and content people, and through a very small pressure cooker experience over maybe 48 hours, they start building prototypes based on your data and your technology. So we host a number of Code for Democracy hackathons. We also have something called scrapathons, data liberation events, where we get people together and they sit and they do nothing except collect information and transform existing information into data for public use. And then, because those are one-off kind of hit-and-run events to try and stimulate interest and hype and excitement, we've also built a network of currently 10 chapters of hacks and hackers across Africa. So everywhere with a dot over there, we've got an active chapter. And what these are a voluntary society of 3 different kinds of people. Journalists or content producers, and we include bloggers as content producers. Creative people who design the interfaces that are very necessary for people to use content intuitively. And thirdly, programmers or developers. They come together for monthly meetups, either to share skills, to learn from each other, or to start planning collaborative projects together. And we've already seen the South African chapter, for example, build that country's very first newsroom-designed interface for browsing the census results that were released 3 weeks ago. So they're already starting to build tools that are immediately useful to reporters. They're also obviously looking to recreate some of the successes that hacks and hackers have had in the US and elsewhere, where some of the inventions that journalists and developers have made together have become funded companies that have attracted funding of up to 10 million US in venture capital. So we talk about things like Storyfy, which was created by the founder of Hacks and Hackers in California, as potential for the media to reinvent themselves. And then, this is way too small, but if anyone wants a copy of the presentation afterwards, we've collected together a set of examples of how media are already using data to tell stories in a far more compelling way. Examples range from Al Jazeera and the BBC through to smaller publications, including some media in Africa who are already pioneering and pushing the boundaries of this new approach to storytelling. Thanks.
Thank you, Justin. I think you just saw the face of the revolution. Not Tahrir Square, but Justin Square. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being so patient. We're going to go through one more presentation. It'll be quick. And then, we'll take a few questions, and then you'll go for lunch. So thank you for bearing with us. I'll call on my next speaker. A lot of this has been, technology up in the air. Justin has tried to bring it down, and even further down is going to be my next speaker. When the minister from Cameroon spoke today, and I am from Cameroon, and folks came to me and said, was that true what Issa Chiroma said? I said, yes, it was. Well, that country is even going further into open government, and the next speaker, Gilbert Oloko, is very innovative in that direction, helping to move the government into more open and data-based interaction with the public. Now, so let's find out how he is doing it, if this is for real. And je crois que vous allez faire cette présentation en français, n'est-ce pas? Voilà, donc I will ask the Anglophones now to put on their earphones so that they can feel what it is. The Francophones have been having these earphones for the last 1 hour. So, ladies and gentlemen, mes amis francophones, libérez donc vos oreilles, tant mieux. Et les anglophones vont voir, n'est-ce pas, ce que vous avez vécu depuis 1 heure de temps. So, just give you a few minutes for the English speaking to put on their earphones, and I'll invite Gilbert Oloko to give us a practical interpretation of what has been going on. Gilbert, si vous voulez.
Okay, before talking in French, I would like to say a few words in English. As the minister today said that we're coming from a country that is bilingual, and it's always a good thing to ensure that we take note of that. We don't forget it. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm very happy to have found out that there's a number of concepts that have been put forward by my colleagues here about first of all, from you were talking about fact-based journalism, fact-based journalism for more credibility. And someone else talks about, high-value data and open government. I think that these concepts will be part of, the content of my presentation. Alors, mesdames et messieurs, voyez-vous, les acteurs du développement, les acteurs du moins de la gestion du développement ont de plus en plus soif de reddition des comptes de la part, n'est-ce pas, des pouvoirs publics, que ce soit des citoyens, que ce soit les médias et les autres. Donc les gouvernements doivent communiquer davantage sur leurs performances en relation avec la gestion de la fortune publique. Il s'agit donc ici, entre autres, notamment du problème de la problématique posée la qualité et de l'accès à l'information. Il s'agit donc de trouver, n'est-ce pas, les voies et moyens pour une communication optimale avec les parties prenantes à la dynamique du développement. Au Cameroun, la recherche de solutions idoines aux défis ainsi relevés a, entre autres, inspiré l'expérience donc que nous avons voulu partager avec vous aujourd'hui. Comme vous voyez bien le titre, il s'agit de l'optimisation de la gouvernance par des outils numériques. Mais avant que je commence, le cœur de ma présentation, il est important de rappeler ce que le ministre de la Communication du Cameroun ce matin disait à propos de l'innovation, en disant que l'innovation n'est pas que technologique. Avant le technologique, il y a un corps de paradigme, n'est-ce pas, qui en fonde le socle. Donc ce que je vais faire, avant de vous présenter les dimensions purement pratico-pratiques de l'outil, n'est-ce pas, qui aide le Cameroun à optimiser, n'est-ce pas, sa gouvernance par les outils méthodologiques, je vais donc vous présenter un certain nombre de ces paradigmes-là, et ici sous le chapeau de ce que j'appelle les choix fondateurs. En effet, l'expérience dont je parle a commencé par un constat, n'est-ce pas, de la nécessité de refonder l'administration publique camerounaise. Ce constat-là a été fait en fonction d'une option pour une philosophie et un cadre de gestion. Il s'agit donc, ce dont je vais vous parler, c'est vraiment d'une dynamique de changement de culture organisationnelle. Un changement de culture organisationnelle axé sur les citoyens, axé sur les valeurs fondamentales, axé sur les résultats et axé sur une allocation judicieuse des ressources. Ça, c'est la première option prise par le gouvernement en vue de cadrer, n'est-ce pas, ses préoccupations par rapport à l'optimisation de la gestion de sa performance. Il y a une seconde option qui a été l'option pour un programme d'impulsion de ce changement organisationnel. Alors, pour ce faire, le gouvernement a décidé, n'est-ce pas, d'utiliser comme véhicule un programme qu'on appelle le programme de modernisation de l'administration par l'intégration de la gestion axée sur les résultats. Ceci est important, je sais que vous êtes très préoccupés par la question du temps, donc je vais vraiment survoler autant que faire se peut ces données-là. C'est toujours difficile d'être celui qui parle le dernier. Alors, le Promagar, c'est quoi? Sans entrer dans les détails, le Promagar, c'est d'abord un dialogue, c'est-à-dire un cadre de dialogue sur les politiques et les valeurs. Un cadre pour le dialogue sur les politiques et les valeurs, notamment avec les éléments que vous avez ici, le développement d'instruments juridiques, l'intégration, la GR, c'est la gestion axée sur les résultats dans la fonction de gestion des ressources humaines, le renforcement de la capacité de budgétisation axée sur les résultats et le développement des partenariats entre l'administration et la société civile. On pourrait dire long sur tout ceci, mais puisque nous n'avons pas de temps, je pense que nous pouvons passer outre. Alors, il y a d'autres éléments qui sous-tendent dans ce cadre opérationnel qui devrait servir de véhicule, n'est-ce pas, au changement de culture organisationnelle. Il y a les questions de système de gestion, les systèmes d'information de gestion, les questions du développement du gouvernement électronique, les questions d'information, d'éducation et de communication, les questions des rapports, les questions de genre dans les relations entre femmes et hommes, et les questions de recherche, de veille et d'innovation. Tous des thèmes, n'est-ce pas, qui sont en phase avec la thématique centrale de ce forum. Mais alors, maintenant, je vais parler du cadre méthodologique. Tout cela, nous avons vu le cadre des paradigmes de base, la gestion axée sur les résultats étant comme véhicule. Mais à côté de cela, il faut opérationnaliser dans ces choix paradigmatiques. Avant de rentrer dans l'opérationnel, il faut nécessairement parler de l'approche méthodologique. Une fois de plus, je vais aller très vite. Vous voyez, il y a ici ce que nous appelons la chaîne PPBS. Donc, ça veut dire planification, programmation, budgétisation, suivi. Le gouvernement a décidé que pour actualiser, n'est-ce pas, pour opérationnaliser de manière systématique et méthodique son programme ou son plan de changement de culture organisationnelle, il fallait que cela se fasse, n'est-ce pas, dans un cadre qui est, n'est-ce pas, qu'on peut voir ici dans ce schéma. Alors, de quoi s'agit-il? Il s'agit d'un cadre qui s'articule autour de quatre composantes. Vous avez les dimensions de prospective et de planification, les dimensions de programmation, de budgétisation, de suivi et d'évaluation. Je ne rentrerai pas dans les détails de tout cela, mais si je m'arrête déjà au niveau de la prospective et de la planification, nous voyons bien que le corps même, c'est-à-dire que la dorsale stratégique des intentions du gouvernement se retrouve dans deux instruments importants. Le premier étant le document de stratégie pour la croissance et l'emploi, qui cadre, n'est-ce pas, les intentions du gouvernement en matière de gestion du développement, adossé à cette stratégie sectorielle. Et puis nous avons d'abord avant ça une vision, un document de vision. Après donc, ce schéma-ci montre, je ne rentrerai pas dans les détails, M. Tchinje, pour ne pas vous faire offense. Et donc il y a tout un ensemble de documents là qui servent, n'est-ce pas, de cadre. Donc la gestion axée sur les résultats comme paradigme de base, la chaîne PPBS comme cadre méthodologique. Alors maintenant, ce qui vous intéresse certainement le plus, c'est que une fois qu'on a établi ces éléments-là, il faudrait pouvoir, n'est-ce pas, voir à ce que leur utilisation se fasse de manière optimale. Pour cela, l'expérience le cœur de l'expérience dont je vais vous parler, c'est par rapport à la plateforme d'automatisation de tout cela. Et c'est la dimension outil dans notre présentation ici. Donc là aussi, je vais être bref. Donc j'avais ici une douzaine d'effets recherchés par cette plateforme-là, parce qu'avant de parler de la plateforme, encore la technologie venant après, il faut d'abord savoir quels sont les outcomes, les effets que l'on recherche par rapport à cela. Il y a un certain nombre d'effets ici que nous recherchons, que le gouvernement camerounais recherche à travers cette plateforme d'automatisation, n'est-ce pas, de sa vision, de son document de stratégie, pour la croissance et l'emploi. Nous avons les questions d'harmonie, les questions d'unité des formes. L'expérience a montré que ça a toujours été très difficile dans l'administration publique d'orchestrer une dynamique de production des résultats à travers plus d'une trentaine de ministères sans que l'on ait à la base, n'est-ce pas, une unité de forme. Alors la plateforme que je vais vous présenter aide à une meilleure traçabilité des résultats, un dialogue plus efficace sur les politiques, une prise de décision plus éclairée et tout ce que vous voyez là sur ce tableau. Et très rapidement dit aussi, Mais ceux qui m'ont précédé ont parlé des technologies qui parfois peuvent être compliquées pour le commun des mortels. Nous avons pensé qu'à la base de notre expérience, à la base de notre démarche, il faudrait que nous misions sur un certain nombre de principes directeurs. D'abord, la simplicité, la convivialité. Il ne faut pas que ceux qui utilisent les systèmes se retrouvent en proie à des considérations de surcroît de travail. Nous pensons que les systèmes ouverts d'information doivent mettre l'emphase sur l'essentiel, n'est-ce pas? Et pour aider donc l'ensemble des acteurs de la gestion de la chose publique au Cameroun, il y a 2 travaux importants qui ont été faits, majeurs d'ailleurs. Le premier a été de fédérer la question de terminologie au sein de l'administration publique. Ça, c'est très, très important. D'un ministère à l'autre, d'une administration à l'autre, on n'avait pas les mêmes concepts. C'est donc un travail participatif énorme qui a été fait dans ce sens-là. Et sur le plan méthodologique, il y a donc une unité de processus qui a été fait à travers un manuel unique. J'aurais pu vous le présenter, mais je crois que ce ne soit pas essentiel. Alors, cela étant, M. Tchindje, j'ai terminé avec cette partie-là. Maintenant, donc, je vais à quoi ça ressemble tout cela? Parce que nous essayons, nous, d'être très concrets. À quoi ça ressemble tout cela aussi, je vais être bref. Je vais donc faire avec vous un tour d'horizon de ce à quoi ressemble cette plateforme. C'est une plateforme, n'est-ce pas, qui répond à la logique interne, à une logique interne qui est définie un peu dans l'image que vous voyez. C'est donc un croisement, n'est-ce pas, du cycle classique de gestion, planification, exécution, suivi, évaluation, apprentissage, parce que les organisations modernes sont par essence aujourd'hui des organisations apprenantes, learning organizations, et nous voulons bâtir une organisation apprenante dans l'administration camerounaise. Alors, un croisement de chacun de ces éléments, de ces éléments du système de gestion avec les résultats, les processus, les risques et les ressources. Ici, dans mon exposé, compte tenu du temps imparti, je vais mettre l'accent sur les résultats et puis sur les ressources. Alors, à quoi ça ressemble? Ça veut dire que si le gouvernement doit communiquer, vous savez, nous n'avons pas une approche journalistique de la chose ici. On dit « it takes two to tango ». Pour qu'on puisse rapporter de manière crédible et efficace et objective sur la performance d'un gouvernement ou d'un État, il est important d'avoir l'information juste, n'est-ce pas, et puis bien ficelée. Alors, je vais parler de chacun de ces niveaux-là. Quand ça, nous sommes déjà dans le système de gestion et d'automatisation, la vision du gouvernement par rapport à Open Government. Alors, nous avons ici, donc pour chaque administration, et ça, toutes les administrations sans exception, vous avez des documents au niveau planification, c'est-à-dire on peut avoir l'ensemble des plans d'action prioritaires de tout le gouvernement. Et ça, c'est extrêmement important parce qu'on s'est rendu compte, que vous verrez, on s'est rendu compte que ce n'est pas toujours évident, n'est-ce pas, de rapporter sur l'action du gouvernement quand on n'a pas l'information qu'il faut pour cela. Dans ce document, par exemple, vous avez une articulation sectorielle, vous avez l'ancrage, n'est-ce pas, la stratégie, vous avez les actions, les objectifs, et ainsi de suite. J'entendais mon ami dire tantôt qu'ils sont contents de réaliser qu'aujourd'hui, on peut suivre l'action du gouvernement, par exemple, ou qui fait quoi, ou au niveau, par exemple, d'une structure sanitaire. Cette application nous permet de faire ce genre de travail. Donc, sans faire beaucoup de commentaires, donc, nous pouvons avoir l'ensemble des plans d'action prioritaires du gouvernement. Et pour faire ces plans d'action prioritaires-là, il est important de comprendre que, n'est-ce pas, c'est le cadre méthodologique unifié qui permet à ces acteurs de le faire. Vous pouvez donc imaginer la quantité de formation, pour l'appropriation de cela. Alors, nous avons donc ici, je ne vais peut-être pas rentrer dans tous ces éléments, nous pouvons identifier l'ensemble des programmes du gouvernement. Par exemple, ici, vous voyez ici, nous avons ici 3500, nous avons ici près de 4000, en fait, sur le portefeuille, n'est-ce pas, de l'action de développement du gouvernement camerounais. Nous avons là 4000, vous voyez ici, nous avons près de 3596 projets et programmes. Ça veut donc dire que, quel que soit votre génie, si vous n'avez pas une plateforme comme celle-ci, vous ne pouvez aucunement rapporter de manière effective et objective sur l'action du gouvernement camerounais. Cet outil va vous permettre de le faire, ne serait-ce qu'au stade de la planification. Et vous voyez même, alors maintenant, on peut identifier cela. Vous avez les secteurs ainsi de suite, les indicateurs, parce que nous entrons, Open Government doit être basé sur une culture d'évaluation. Et pour pouvoir évaluer, il faut une batterie d'indicateurs, n'est-ce pas, répondant aux standards internationaux. Il faut tous ces éléments que vous avez dans ce document-ci, que j'aurais eu le plaisir de vous présenter, mais le temps me fait défaut. Alors, on peut identifier au-delà des programmes, on peut identifier tout un ensemble de mesures, on peut faire des synthèses, dont je vais vous faire l'économie de tout ça. Ça, c'est au niveau de la planification des résultats. Mais le nerf de la guerre, dans un gouvernement qui fait face à des ressources réduites, c'est l'allocation des ressources. Alors pour cela, une fois que les départements ont élaboré leur plan d'action prioritaire, on a tout un ensemble d'outils, n'est-ce pas, pour associer ces résultats-là les associer aux ressources, ce que nous appelons les cadres des dépenses à moyen terme. Ça veut dire que vous avez là les résultats, les indicateurs, ainsi de suite, y compris même les tâches. Vous avez les montants pour cela et vous pouvez le faire dans une dynamique de planification quinquennale. Il me reste combien de temps? On n'a plus de temps. Mais vous allez me faire justice. Et donc, pour respecter ces dimensions-là, donc nous avons tout un ensemble pour faire la planification pluriannuelle. Et après ça, il y a un outil très important pour le gouvernement. Une fois que nous avons, n'est-ce pas, des plans d'action prioritaires, il est important que le gouvernement, compte tenu de son portefeuille, même financier, puisse encore aller davantage dans la priorisation. Nous avons donc ce que nous appelons les matrices d'action prioritaires. Donc, le gouvernement priorise par rapport à ça pour s'arrimer aux ressources disponibles. Et puis, un point très important, dans toute cette expérience-là, le gouvernement a décidé, n'est-ce pas, depuis un certain nombre d'années, de s'engager vers ce que l'on appelle le budget programme. C'est-à-dire qu'avant, on faisait les budgets par rapport aux moyens. Aujourd'hui, on ne peut procéder à l'allocation des ressources qu'en fonction, n'est-ce pas, des résultats prédéfinis et des indicateurs susceptibles de les mesurer. Alors donc, la mise en œuvre du budget programme au Cameroun va commencer en janvier. Et voici donc ici, par exemple, n'est-ce pas, des éléments de notre projet de loi de finances pour l'exercice 2013, n'est-ce pas, qui porte sur tous les ministères et sur tous les chapitres, n'est-ce pas. Et donc, ce qui est intéressant ici, pour ceux qui s'occupent de l'information, c'est qu'on peut toujours faire des recoupements entre divers aspects pour pouvoir aider à la prise de décision. Donc voilà, ça ne servirait à rien d'aller davantage dans le détail. Donc nous avons, et je termine là-dessus, nous avons donc, après la planification, nous avons même l'exécution. Donc après le planning, il y a le reporting. Donc, une fois que ceux qui s'intéressent à l'information voient ce que nous avons planifié, ils peuvent maintenant, à un moment donné, voir ce qui a été fait et puis donc pouvoir en juger de manière plus objective et plus crédible. Donc voilà un peu ça, il y a tout un ensemble d'outils là que je ne présenterai pas. Et pour finir, il y a quand même pour nous, je disais que le Open Government, c'est aussi la culture d'apprentissage. Donc il s'agit pour nous non seulement de mettre à la disposition des acteurs que sont les médias, les citoyens et les autres, l'information crédible et qui traduit bien les intentions et les actions du gouvernement, mais aussi d'apprendre en retour, n'est-ce pas, de ces expériences-là. Voilà donc très schématiquement dit ce qu'il fallait dire. Et pour dire une dernière chose, nous entendons au plan des perspectives faire deux choses. Pour nous, dans notre stratégie de développement, la dimension intégration régionale est très très importante. Il y a donc dans cette plateforme, n'est-ce pas, j'aurais pu vous le montrer aussi, des expériences que nous faisons par rapport à la dynamique régionale. Nous avons pu par exemple aligner l'ensemble des intentions du gouvernement camerounais avec le programme économique régional de la CEMAC, la communauté des États, la communauté économique et monétaire de l'Afrique centrale. Et la dernière étape dans tout cela, dans l'optique du Open Government, ça va être de mettre en ligne l'ensemble de ces informations-là et pour qu'elles puissent être consultées par n'importe qui, n'importe comment. Je vous remercie.
Merci infiniment, Gilbert. C'est extraordinaire ce que vous venez de faire parce que pour moi et pour beaucoup de l'assistance, je crois que c'est Open Government était soit une initiative poussée par la Banque mondiale, les institutions internationales, mais voilà enfin, on a parlé du Kenya et tout ça, mais toujours en collaboration avec ces institutions, voilà enfin un pays, et j'espère qu'il y en a d'autres, qui, n'est-ce pas, avec ses propres sources intellectuelles et autres, et, n'est-ce pas, en train de pousser, de mettre en place, n'est-ce pas, des institutions pour assurer ce que nous voulons, ce open government. Maintenant, c'est pour nous, les journalistes, nous, les patrons de presse, d'en profiter. Amener nos jeunes à exploiter ces informations qui sont mises à leur disposition désormais. Thank you all very much. I would love to take questions from the floor, but I know everybody is hungry, and the food has been on the table for quite a while. I'm so impressed. But, you know, I just feel that we should at least let one person from the floor, I hope it's a woman, but at least let one person from the floor. All right, I only see male hands, so 2 people from the floor, 1 woman and 1 man, and because I saw your hand, please say something very quickly, and I hope there's a lady. Of course, Janet Mini is a good representation of the female gender. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for the presenters. Your presentations are really illuminating. We've learned a lot. I am a journalist from the Gambia. I'm an editor of a daily independent newspaper called Foroya. And I'm sure all of you are aware of the situation in the Gambia, that we have a climate there that is not really media-friendly. Media houses are being closed, print media, radio stations closed down, and then there are laws that are really repressive with regards to the operation of the free media. But all the same, the media house that I come from, we have devised ways and means of existing. We know how to circumvent, the bottlenecks, and then to be able to get the facts and then present them in a very objective, relevant, and effective way. So we are Okay, we are operating in that environment. There are a lot of Gambian journalists who are in exile. You know the situation there. And then there is also solidarity from the media fraternity. We are getting support from the media fraternity in terms of capacitizing the media practitioners in the Gambia, presenting our case to the world. Organizations like the Africa Editors Forum, IFJ, CPJ, this organization in the United States, anyway. And then West Africa Media Foundation. These are all organizations, and a lot more organizations are helping us, present our case, the situation in the Gambia, and then helping the media there to become more professional. I know we should be ambitious as media. We should be ambitious. We should embrace new technology. We should embrace innovations. But I'm just I'm making a word of caution that in countries like where I come from, the infrastructure that is there is not really ready for new technology, if I can say that. In terms of electricity, in terms of poverty, people do not have access to get these mobile phones. So if we have to render all media, render it as obsolete, we are going to run into troubles. We will find ourselves in the desert. We will abandon all media, that is the radio and the newspapers, in order to embrace this when we don't have the infrastructure in place to sustain it. So I think we can accommodate new technology whilst, we will continue with old technology, because I believe that for a long time, especially from the country I come from, for a very long time we are going to, get along with old media. We are not yet ready for new media.
Okay. We got your point, and I'm really, thank you very much for making such a very important point, because there are countries that face the challenges you're talking about, but I'm not sure that your conclusion is the right one. So we'll challenge that conclusion by something someone is going to say here. But before we do that, and I know we are hurrying, the food is getting cold, but I cannot stop Janet Mini from talking, so Janet, please.
I'll be quick. May I just say it was an absolutely excellent session. I'm normally one of the older people who is more cautious about it, but Justin can put me in a boot camp now. It's okay. To add to that, I don't often talk about the gender issues, but you invited a woman to talk. I think this is an activity where you must focus really, really hard on bringing many, many more women and young women into this kind of activity. Lastly, I would say the only thing I still really miss hearing about is how you monetize these activities, how you do the business side of it, how do you cost it, what's the model, what actually makes the money. That's the part that wasn't particularly discussed now, and it's the other half of the missing link right now.
I knew that you'll want to open this session for 2 more hours. I don't know why I gave you the microphone, Janet, but you've asked a fundamental question. Of course, it's something that Ami and others will be addressing through the, I hope, and I'm speaking. That's right. It will be addressed. Your answer will be addressed. The question will be addressed. Justin, do you want to talk a little bit, just for a minute, about this? Quickly. Yes, please.
Okay. So just very quickly, there's a session tomorrow about how newsrooms can firstly experiment with this stuff without massive costs, but also how they can immediately start generating revenues from some of the data and other digital techniques. It's not all just data. And I think that's the second session in the technology trend tomorrow. And then just coming to the comment about not being ready for technology. It's a complaint that we hear the whole time. And the reality is that even if our audiences are not ready, our newsrooms should start getting ready. So we don't have to always use data or even mobile platforms as a delivery platform to get to audiences. If there's still a lot of infrastructure development that needs to happen, what we should be doing is that our newsrooms already need to start using these tools in very small controlled situations to improve the depth, the quality, and the relevance of the content that they're producing. So even in the Gambia, for example, a newsroom could be accessing data from outside of the Gambia to improve the quality and the depth of the reporting, because the Gambian government would have multilateral treaties with things like the World Bank, the UN, and elsewhere, where they are supplying them with information that perhaps they're not releasing to local journalists or local media. We've seen this at play in Ghana, where Craig and I were 2 weeks ago for a boot camp, where the open data initiative of the government there launched in January, but they have not yet released a single data set. In the space of 3 days, we liberated 8 data sets that included every single tender issued or recorded as issued legally in the country for the past 4 years, as well as a list of every single parliamentarian, who they are, what their professions are, where they come from, their contact details, who their wives are at least, what their status is. And you can then start using, a budget, the national budget. And those data sets were liberated both from within Ghana as well as externally from Ghana. Based on that, people in the boot camp were able to start building tools to analyze the information. So for example, at the moment now, Joy FM, which is a radio station in Ghana, is investigating why some of those tenders that are recorded as issued are in violation of Ghanaian law, or they differ from what the media and the public were told they were being issued. And that comes from just a 2-day analysis of raw information. It's not all numbers. A lot of the data is actually narrative words. Also, in that same session, we had people who arrived who didn't even know how to use a spreadsheet. By the end of it, they built a project that tracked oil royalties that are supposed to be paid back to rural communities. Now, these are communities who probably don't even have feature phones. They have text-based phones. But using sophisticated analytical tools, this small team of people was able to track back where the royalties were paid by the oil companies to government and why they had not arrived at the rural villages or the rural communities. So it enabled and it gave audiences a tool to hold not just governments but also companies accountable. And that information was accessible to audiences simply sending in a text message. But the engine driving it behind was some of the more sophisticated data tools. And if those journalists could learn how to do this in 3 days of intensive boot camp and 1 day of discussion with media owners, then it's possible to replicate that in places like the Gambia as well. So we can start small, you use appropriate technologies, and you don't overreach. You use it for an analysis before you start building mass audiences on top of it. So.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Justin. And I want to thank the panelists before we go. I want to thank Gilbert for giving us this very practical interpretation of how governments are beginning to move into the open data field. I want to thank Craig Hammer, who's next to him, coming all the way from Washington to be with us. I want to thank Justin Arnstein, the face of data revolution in Africa. And I want to thank Shiv Shavikumar, who the Senior Vice President from Nokia, not only for being here and for giving us this brilliant presentation, but also for making available some very interesting gifts for tonight's program. And of course, I want to thank myself. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation, let me say this, ladies and gentlemen, has something called the Index on Governance in Africa. It has the most, it is the richest data, information with data on Africa that you'll find. I mean, the World Bank comes next. We're first. So for those who, you don't have to know it, but encourage your young people to take a look at that document. It tells a lot about governance. I needed to put in that plug for my organization. Thank you. Lunch is ready, and I'll have Rukaya tell us where to go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Eric, for chairing this amazing panel. I think it's really creating a lot of interest. So I think after having food for thought, it's now real food. So we are actually going to move to Salon Brun, which is downstairs where the registration on your left-hand side. So there will be hostesses which will guide you. And we have to be back at 2:45 because we have 2 more plenary sessions. So please enjoy yourself, and we'll be having also 2 reports that will be launched. So thank you so much for being patient, and be back, hope, by 2:45. Thank you.